So, good morning all, and thank you for joining. My name is Will McKeon-White, and it's my pleasure to be here talking to you today at L3-AI 2021. And we're going to be hopping into the 5 best practices for chatbot success in just a few moments. But also just wanted to say a quick thank you. This is a topic that's really quite close to me and one I'm really passionate about, and just can't wait to share some of the insights we have gathered as part of our research. So a quick background on what I do and how I come to you today. I work as a researcher at Forrester. If you've never heard of Forrester, we're a research and consulting organization that helps business and technology leaders of all backgrounds identify, adopt, and optimize technology and practices to become more customer obsessed. How I support this in my role is I spend my days talking both with Forrester clients and more broadly with technology adopters about their challenges, their successes, and their problems that they have yet to solve. As part of my research into the modern technology operations space over the past 3 years now, I've been fortunate enough to talk at this point with dozens of different chatbot adopters and on their various different pain points and about their different stages in their journeys. And one of the surprises I've found in this research is while the specific technical day-to-day challenges of organizations run into, those tend to be somewhat unique, but the same core strategic issues and questions are coming up time and time again from organizations of all different sizes and all different chatbot use cases. A direct result of this, I've been able to identify 5 best practices for chatbot adoption. And so without any further additional preamble, here's what you all came for, the 5 core principles for chatbot success. And I'll spend the rest of today's talk really going into more detail on each one of them here. The first principle for success is really related to team composition. And you need to ensure that you're building a cross-functional team with relevant subject matter input. I know build a chatbot team isn't necessarily a revolutionary piece of advice, but often when we're talking to organizations, adopting chatbots or working to scale out their initiatives, the project runs in either a specific business unit or a department. While this usually works for initial adoption, we found that far too many initiatives actually lack the necessary resources to make an effective chatbot, or they run into competing internal initiative, or don't actually involve the subject matters in the development of the chatbot until later in the process. A centralized cross-functional team helps avoid some of these problems. How this team works is that the chatbot team in an organization lives within that team. And then that chatbot team goes about getting input from the different relevant departments, making chatbot decisions. They drive things like tool selection, chatbot use case scaling. They centralize resources like developer talent, and they spin up end-user testing groups, which is a really critical stage that a lot of organizations don't actually have built into their core team. So let's break down the different components here and sort of the roles and responsibilities. The core management team helps set the enterprise-wide chatbot strategy. Recently, we've talked to a number of different organizations who have had up to a baker's dozen different chatbots running around in their organization, and they've all been competing internally for resources, for priority as well as developer talent. And there's also the opposite problem where there's a central chatbot team, but who doesn't necessarily have any power to say no. And they're being pulled in a dozen different directions to support all different forms of business problems, and the chatbot's expected to effectively be a miracle cure. The chatbot management team should be an arbiter of these chatbot decisions. They work alongside with the business to create and match capabilities to that business need. And this team should be relatively small. In the smallest of instances, this could be just a single person. But in the largest of enterprises, for example, a multinational, this could be up to a dozen different people. But most of the support team in that dozen people would be supporting staff like analysts and the team and the team of heads, or the core strategic deciders, or the people controlling the rudder of the ship, if you will, would be comprised of only up to 3 individuals there, just because you want that decision capability contained within a relatively small number of people, just for the sanity of the team. And the dev or knowledge-based team actually goes about creating these capabilities. We won't spend too much time on this one just because it's a relatively well-known problem or capability at this point. But this is the part of the team that actually makes the changes in the chatbot. And they're the ones working to extend your capabilities, responsible for integration, development, and management of the technical parts of the bot. One of the key differences this model of organization makes is consolidating this talent into one group rather than having a few different people with NLP experience running around, each trying to set up a different chatbot. And this model also ensures that these developers are working daily with these subject matter experts. This is not just an isolated, developers are forced to go off and develop everything all by themselves. This is very much a cooperative effort with resources shared and conversations happening daily between these different groups. And then there's the end user champions. Often we found end users and their concerns aren't directly involved in the development of chatbot initiatives, and really that's a mistake. You can't run a chatbot development effort in the traditional requirements gathering delivery transactional model, because, and we'll be talking about in just a few minutes, the biggest predicator for success is end users finding your tool useful. And as such, you need to be involving end users, I should say, earlier in chatbot conversation than other applications might necessarily would. So that means developing out a group of end user champions for internally facing chatbots. So for employees, these can be people who respond positively to our to IT capability surveys, people who aren't necessarily giving you 5s on everything, but who actually seem to want to help with your development efforts. Those people are really valuable, and involving them in these capabilities, having them try new functionality, and seeing if things are working is a really critical first step for understanding that overall success. And if you're a customer-facing chatbot, something that is external to your organization, that's a little bit more of a complicated problem to develop these capabilities or to develop these end-user champions. But again, looking for people who are responding with thought to your to end-user surveys is a really excellent first step there. And if you're doing something like trying to automate out support potentially for customers, or you're looking to automate some of those initial interactions, there's usually business value. There's usually a specific dollar amount tied to that. Getting some additional funds for actually providing things like discounts or gift cards to those end users who decide that they want to be helping you there is an excellent way to reward that interaction. And then finally, this will be my last point here, making sure that you let people know what you've changed as a direct result of their input is an excellent way to keep people engaged for the long run. Then lastly, there's the subject matter experts who actually ensure the relevance of the chatbot. The core development and strategic team shouldn't necessarily know all the ins and outs of HR, sales operations, customer success and support, or financial operations. This should still be contained within those teams. Instead, you should be working with individuals with either designated technology individuals or with process managers in those teams to ensure that their needs are appropriately reflected in the chatbot. Too often we find that teams are siloed and kind of go off alone to undertake in these initiatives, and that often the results are underwhelming. We talked to, I think it was actually a healthcare organization who their development team had been told to go build an IT chatbot. They did just that, and the intent recognition rate was something around I think it was under 60%. And that was because they didn't necessarily know how users were actually talking about their problems. Once they started working with IT and running their chatbot language models against actual data and retraining them with that, the number jumped up to something in the 80 or 90 range. The second priority is around strategic orientation. I jumped a little bit hard into that, but I should say, moving along. The second key point or best practice is around strategic orientation. Keeping users at the center of your initiative is a critical foundation to ensure your tool is useful to end users. And too often, strategies look something like this. When we're brought into conversations, organizations have a goal, want to achieve, and the chatbot will help them get there. But they don't necessarily know the intermediary steps. It's just that somehow bringing in AI or machine learning capabilities will magically solve their problems. And the really weird part is that that's not entirely different. That's not too far from the truth. That question mark second step really is just ensuring that it's useful to end users, and that is left out of a lot of different strategies we found. And as such, when you're actually going about building out your capabilities, keeping that user at the center should be step one. And knowing that everyone is using everyone who is using your chatbot, I should say, is looking to accomplish something is a critical foundation here. Ensuring that those people can complete those transactions that they've set out to do should be the foundational goal of your chatbot. And from that, you get the business benefits. And so there's some certain specific steps that you should take to ensure that people are able to accomplish their goals that they've set out to do. For example, set expectations early. Say what you can and can't do as part of the initial interaction of your chatbot. And I'd also add here, if you can't do something or you don't know what a user is trying to accomplish, tell them. Be very clear about the recognition of your chatbot. Not knowing why you're unable to get things done is probably the most frustrating thing about most support channels or most automated systems, because people will be, in the case of support, people will likely be grouping you in with things like IVR systems, and that's a very poor experience up front. And so when you're interacting with brands and you're trying to figure out what a chatbot can and can't do, making sure that you alleviate some of those concerns of, am I going to be trapped in this menu hell or this maze of mirrors, if you will, of not knowing what this thing can do, not knowing if I'm on the right track, and I just want to get my thing done. Please, oh gosh, let me do that. Avoiding that spiral, if you will, of poor experience is a really critical step to ensure that people have a good experience with your chatbot and that people find it useful. And another way to also ensure that your chatbot experience remains useful and to ensure that every single interaction with your chatbot has some degree of value add is to make sure that humans can be in the loop. You shouldn't ever leave your users hanging or even have to repeat their interactions with your organization. When someone uses that chatbot, it should only ever be a value-add experience and never a redundant one. And so ensuring that you still, for example, when you're trying to get support or you're trying to accomplish something, that you can still talk with a human in either the transition stage or in the long term is an excellent way to ensure that every single interaction still meets that user's outcome, because that user is, again, trying to accomplish something. If they are prevented from accomplishing their goal, that is a bad experience, and that means that your chatbot has ultimately failed. Humans provide an excellent flexible capability to ensure that people can still accomplish their objective. And finally, as part of these interactions, make sure you're keeping interactions sort of centralized in this chat window. Your chatbot really should never, ever be a collection of page-pushing links. That's a really good way to get people confused, to get people lost. You're just replacing your web page navigational bar with a even more clunky interface. While it can help them significantly in navigating and finding things, the more information you keep centralized in this window, the more that people can, the easier it is for people to accomplish their goal, and the more valuable your chatbot becomes. Then the third best practice: don't reinvent the wheel. This is really around strategic development efforts and where you should be spending your time. And when it comes to development investment, use pre-existing assets wherever possible. Chatbots are hard. They're really hard. I don't think I need to tell anybody on this call that. But to make a good chatbot takes a lot of time and effort, and a lot of tuning, and a lot of investment. Making sure that it's useful to users and making sure that you are actually able to accomplish your business goals should be step one. And you should be using as many reusable assets as possible. And so that means things like out-of-the-box capabilities if you're using a commercial tool, or open source modules that other people or other organizations have already developed. These are massive time and sanity savers in this chatbot development efforts, and really recommend that people default to those wherever possible. And then close recognition gaps by using real existing interaction records. Again, this should not be a development effort in a void or in a vacuum. You have existing data in your organization about how people are talking about the specific problem they're trying to solve. Make sure you're actually going to use that. In the healthcare example I gave earlier, how they helped resolve that intent recognition problem was by bringing in those real tickets, was by bringing in real IT tickets, and noting how those had been resolved, and using those to retrain the language models. That in itself, that small step, allowed them to achieve success and make their chatbot useful where it previously had not been. Then make sure you're actually planning a practical capability rollout. This is a little bit related to when I said earlier with the organization or the chatbot development team being pulled in 100 different directions from many different business units. Instead, we recommend picking the top 10 most pressing or repeatable tasks in your given business unit or sector that you're deciding to tackle, and starting with those. This is where you should be working with a subject matter expert, and really focus figuring out which are those 10 most pressing tasks, as well as how you can actually go about automating them. In one organization, they actually weren't able to automate password resets for various different security reasons, and had been going about that for a little bit too long on the chatbot development team. Instead, they worked with a subject matter expert, identified that wasn't appropriate, and instead were able to identify 10 others that were suitable for that automation. And that provides you with a very banded and very achievable goal. That can be achieved in a relatively short amount of time, whereas when you're being pulled to continuously add on updates, you can't actually spend enough time making those good to make them useful to that end user. And then related to that, human augmentation can actually help bootstrap that broader usage. So when you're rolling out those 10 new capabilities, you can also rely on things like support agents to help you figure out how you can better automate that end-to-end interaction, as well as giving them intermediary automations to help accelerate any given support experience. So things like information collection, like rote responses, if you give your support agents the tools they need to really accelerate any given interaction, that in itself is a significant value add to your organization and will help your users have a better experience as well as your agents. And that creates a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement of those chatbot interactions. And finally, in this section, make sure you're actually investing in optimization. Too often, organizations assume that they've done, or once they've done those top 10 most requested things, that they can move on to the next 10. They can, but they also need to be continuously optimizing those first 10, because the way people talk can change, and the immediate priorities of individuals can change. And so they might be coming at given interaction from a different perspective, or using different language. Making sure that your interactions are continuously useful is critical. And finally, make sure you're measuring what really matters, user success. And so these six different metrics you find are really good setup for sort of providing you a well-rounded understanding of how successful your interactions are. Things like intent recognition rate is critical for understanding whether or not your chatbot can understand someone. But then things like numbers of interactions per user, that again is also a really good metric for understanding, is your chatbot actually useful? And even is there something that is providing, is there an underlying problem that this individual is trying to solve? And finally, things like a total outcome score, we found those can be also really helpful as well for identifying problematic interactions when a user might not necessarily have had a failed interaction with your organization. They were still able to accomplish that immediate goal, but they didn't necessarily have the greatest experience doing it. Something like a total outcome score can actually help uncover that. And then user success, I just really want to hammer this home. User success is determined by its usefulness to users. If your end users aren't finding your tool useful, then your tool will fail. And lastly, when you're not sure if something is working, ask. This is probably one of the most critical reasons for having something like that end user champion group, because that allows you to have a quick and safe sounding board in terms of different capabilities, and it allows you to get a better understanding of the success of your overall chatbot. And so that brings us to the end of my presentation and to the start of Q&A. Thank you all so much for joining, and I will open up the floor in just a moment.